Hello and welcome to today's Info Security Magazine webinar. My name's Dan Raywood, I'm the contributing editor of Info Security Magazine, and I'll be moderating today's event in association with Access Data. And for the next hour, we're going to be looking at the subject of enabling forensic investigations that work. Obviously not one that doesn't work. We want ones to talk about ones that do work and get more of the sort of the 101 around forensic investigations. What you should know, what you need to know, and what they involve, and how you can make sure you're doing it correctly. And well, thanks very much for joining us. Those of you who joined us right at the start, and obviously we'll be giving you some information over the next hour that we hope is going to be very, very useful. So before we introduce you to today's speakers, a few housekeeping points from me. We are going to have some polls running throughout the hour, so please do join with those as and when they appear. If you have any questions, then do use the questions option. It's right there at the just below the screen, and let us know anything you want to ask. Obviously, we'll do our best to delegate the questions to the right speaker, and I'll obviously get your questions answered. If you're on Twitter, as you can see on the screen right now, it's at the bottom of the screen. It's hashtag InfoSecWebinar. And if you use our Twitter at InfoSecurityMag, you'll sort of see some of the other things we're doing as well, and lots of stuff on there which I hope will be quite useful. And also, if you're a member of ISC Squared, ISARCA or EC Council, you can claim 1 CPE credit based on a minimum attendance of 60 minutes. So for the full hour, if you stick around for the full hour, you'll get your CPE certificates, which you download from your Info Security Magazine accounts. If you're listening on demand, sometimes it can take about 48 hours to process, so do stick with it. It doesn't kind of appear immediately. Do stick with it, and it should appear within the next 48 hours after you're listening to this. So yes, big thanks to you if you are one of the accredited members. Obviously, we'd be delighted to introduce you to all this educational content. So let's introduce our guest speakers today. So I'm Dan Raywood from Info Security Magazine. Also joined today by Nehar Teti. Nehar is a Senior Information Security Analyst at BH Consulting. And also Keith Lockhart, who is VP of Strategic Programs at Access Data. So great to have both Keith and Nehar with us today. And before we hand over to the first presentation, let's start the first poll question and ask you, are you currently running forensic investigations? Right, I'm just worried I'll start ruining then. I'm doing that, I spelled it correctly. What are you currently running forensic investigation? Maybe a question for later on. How do you ruin forensic investigation? The 4 options there, which are yes, internally, yes, using external specialists, not yet, or no. Do let us know which of those, so we get a bit of an idea of what kind of level of forensic investigations that you actually currently do. Obviously, it's whether you're able to do them themselves, if it's people using an external company to do that for you. Maybe not yet, maybe it's just because you haven't actually, you've not really got around to it yet, and that's something you're joining us today to learn a bit more about that. Or just let us know which one is appropriate to you. So, without further ado, let's hand over to Nehar from BH Consulting, who's our first presenter today. So Nehar, I will hand the slide deck over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dan, for the introduction. So as Dan mentioned, so we're talking about forensic investigations that actually work, and what are some of the resources required internally, externally to do that, and some of the tips that, through conducting forensic investigations within our own company, what have we learned and what are the tips that we can share with you, and also some of the tools that are commonly used in the market today, or the industry, sorry. So just a brief introduction about myself. So currently I'm working as a Senior Information Security Analyst at BH Consulting, based in Dublin here in Ireland. I've conducted forensic investigations with our team here, mostly corporate and civil. Haven't yet got the opportunity to give a testimony in court or be involved in any criminal investigations as such. But hopefully in the future, I've been involved in giving other talks, webinars, etc., in conferences, and also certified to SANS, GC, IH, and ACE certificate as well. So what's on the agenda? So really, we're going to talk about how can we run successful forensic investigations. What are the resources or the services that can be sourced internally and externally? And what's the most important thing is, the skills and the qualities that a forensic technician or a forensic analyst or the team itself should have in order to conduct successful investigations. So just to start off here, I'm sure, if all of you are here, you probably have a good background on what digital forensic investigations are. But just to make sure we're on the same page, just one or two slides on the basics here. So what is digital forensic investigation and what's the need? So basically, when we use digital devices, there's some evidence that can be left on them that can help with either criminal investigations or corporate investigations. So a digital device can either be used as an instrument of crime, or you can use it in order to get evidence. So, for instance, your networking devices might have logs that can be used in an investigation, even though it wasn't actually an instrument of crime. Forensic means scientific tests or techniques. So one of the most important things is maintaining what's called the chain of custody when we're doing such investigations. And we'll look at one or two definitions in the next slide. So when would we need forensic investigations? So it can range from criminal cases, corporate cases, or civil cases. So it could be in case of hacking or email harassment, could be murder, terrorism, company policy violations, industry espionage. There's loads of use cases. In fact, everywhere you're using digital devices, you can potentially have a need for digital investigation. And who would rely on the skills of forensic experts? So law enforcement, military, government agencies, law firms, corporate firms, private investigators, data recovery firms. So really, there's a whole lot of need there out for skilled digital forensic investigators. So just to look at some definitions here. So the first one is from NIST. So NIST has a nice sort of a concise definition, and I really like their definition of of digital forensics. They say it's a science and preserving integrity, and they also mention the term strict chain of custody. And another definition is from maybe a little bit more teased out is from CNSSI, which is a U.S. national organization, and they mentioned that we need to make sure that we're following proper process through the investigation. So search authority, chain of custody, validation with mathematics, use of validated tools, repeatability, reporting, and expert testimony. So I think these terms are probably not very they're not explicit in the NIST definition. So my perfect definition would be really a combination of these two. I was also looking at a definition from DFRWS, which is a not-for-profit organization, and they are quite heavily involved in digital forensics and addressing emerging challenges. But unfortunately, their definition did not have this term chain of custody, the one that they defined in 2001 as the first working group. So these are, just to outline here, so that we're on the same page. And just in terms of the process, so there are loads and loads of different processes that have been outlined for what you can use to carry out digital forensics investigations. And here are the two, top trusted sources, so NIST and SANS. So this is their outline of what digital forensic investigation looks like. So the NIST one is quite, generic, applicable, but probably they haven't included the first two steps before collection there. So preservation of the evidence is quite important, and before that is the identification. But in general, this is the typical process that you would follow through a forensic investigation. So now that we understand what digital forensics is, what is the process, so what are the skills or qualities that a forensic investigator should have to ensure that you're performing an effective investigation. So the first and foremost would be the technical aptitude. So obviously, performing forensic investigation does require technical skills. So you'll need to work across a variety of technologies, from computers to mobile devices, operating systems, and identify and respond to security breaches or network hacks. So you should have a knowledge in a specialist area. So do you specialize in Windows or Linux or network forensics or software forensics? So having a technical aptitude and area of expertise would be quite important for an effective investigation. And overall, your team should cover whatever technical expertise is required for an investigation. The next one then is attention to detail. Now, we all are aware that there's a huge rise in the amount of data, amount of information, and therefore you have to be very detail-oriented to carefully sort through significant amounts of data to uncover and examine the digital evidence. And so you need to be thorough and have a keen eye for detail. The next skill then is analytical skills. So definitely, we have all these pieces or pieces of a puzzle when we're performing or when we've acquired the evidence and we're trying to analyze it. So in order to make sure that, we do a successful investigation, we need to notice patterns or discrepancies. You need to be able to join the dots, interpret data, and ultimately solve the crime. So analytical ability is quite important. The next one is a desire to learn. I guess no one can deny, because the technical field is fast changing, and so we all need to be current with the best practice and emerging industry trends and technologies. So a desire to learn, again, is very important. Communication skills. So as an investigator, you will need to explain your findings or your rationale, not just maybe within your organization, even in a courtroom as part of a criminal case if you're involved in one. So it's essential that we convey technical information clearly and concisely to individuals of different levels of technical comprehension. So it could be, ranging from your more tech-savvy colleagues to the boardroom or in court. So you need to make sure that you have the ability to clearly convey that technical information. The next one is comprehension of cybersecurity fundamentals. So obviously, cybersecurity and forensics might be, two different fields with some overlap, but it is essential to have a solid understanding of what tactics criminals might use to breach systems and how cybersecurity professionals can work to prevent such attacks. So if you don't have an understanding of how a breach happens, it would definitely obviously take more time for you to investigate a case. So the next one then is ability to work with challenging material. So as a computer forensic or digital forensic investigator, or any investigator, I guess, you would come across challenging material, often offensive or disturbing. So you need to be mentally prepared and, make sure that you're unaffected or probably not as much affected by what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis. The next one then is probably one of the most fundamental ones, is an understanding of law and criminal investigation. So forensics is not just about computers, it's not just about technology. It is as much about criminal investigation or the law as it is about technology. So you need to have an understanding of what is the local jurisdiction or the national or federal laws, and based on the cases you get, how do they apply? The next one then is avoiding cognitive bias. So the last two there, thanks to my COO, she mentioned them, and these are really, really important qualities that an investigator should have. Avoiding cognitive bias. So from our day-to-day activities, we form our own subjective social reality or our own perception of the input we receive. And so we might, sometimes not use rationale. We might use those biases to inform our decisions. So when you're a forensic investigator, you have to be clear of any cognitive bias, and you really just have to report the facts as they are. And the next one then I think is quite understood is discretion. So when you are doing a case, you need to make sure that you share only information that is required to the relevant people and no one else. So those are some of the qualities and the skills that an investigator should have. And there's a quote here, if you can see on the top there. It says, check your ego and ask for help. Your goal is to solve the case and not strive for glory. So rightly said, so it's from a book from Julie Clegg. And so we're not trying here to glorify ourselves, by solving a case. So we have to be collaborative. We have to work with others. You have to find the missing pieces of the puzzle and therefore solve the case based on that. Okay, so a quick slide on the certifications aspect. There are loads of certifications out there, and I'm sure you might have explored as well. But in order to gain expertise in particular areas, we do have some vendor neutral and vendor specific certifications. We don't advocate any or favor any. These are just out there, and I'm sure there are more. So you have some by SANS, and there's vendor-specific ones by Access Data, Encase, etc. So I personally have done the Access Data Certified Examiner, thoroughly enjoyed doing that exam. You have a huge spiral binding that you have to go through, maybe more than one, and you have to be really familiar with the tool, obviously. It was quite fun to do. So few certifications there that you can do. So coming to the point where, how can we actually provide an effective investigation? So just on the internal resources. So what sort of internal resources do we need, or structure do we need within our organization in order to make sure that that we have a successful investigation? So management support and identification of stakeholders is really important when we're doing these investigations. So you would definitely need to convince them that if there is an incident, you can very easily say, if there is an incident, you can wipe a machine and you can rebuild it and start using it again. But in doing that, you're not doing a root cause analysis. You're not going back and finding why something happened. So explaining to the management, and I believe now because of the likes of GDPR and legislation that we have in place, that it is required legally or by regulatory bodies to actually perform these investigations. So in some cases, it would be an automatic support from management. In some cases, for example, to acquire some resources, you might need to build a business case. It's really important to have a really good forensic case management tool. So you can have individual tools, there's loads of open source tools out there. But if you're starting a forensics lab, it's integral to have a case management tool so that, because the workloads are expanding and the complexity is expanding, we need to make sure that our evidence is not distributed between different tools and we see a holistic picture. And so a case management tool, like multi-purpose tool provided by Access Data or Encase, these are really important in a forensics lab. Then obviously, workflow processes, secure channels of communication internally. So whether the team is communicating to other people or other people communicating to the forensics team, it's really important to make sure that you have a secure channel. And when conducting investigations, it should be done in an area that's secure and private. Obviously, because the discretion aspect, and also because you might be seeing information that that needs to be protected. So the next bit here is external resources. So what sort of external resources or communications or contacts do we need to maintain? So you might need help of peers in other organizations in order to solve a case or conduct the investigation. You might also need to liaise with law enforcement or supervisory authorities. So for instance, for GDPR, so if there is a data breach involved, you will need to notify the DPC. So if you're a third party conducting the investigation, then your customer will have to, or client will have to notify the DPC before you perform the investigation. Solicitors, consumer protection, child protection. So these are some of the bodies that you might need to communicate with and have contacts in place. So, in order to run a successful investigation, we need to make sure we have all these aspects of the people, process, technology covered. So, make sure that we have skilled and experienced forensic technicians or teams. Collaboration with other teams definitely are important. So, the next one then is process. So, standard processes, procedures, definitely. The other one then is qualifier process. So again, mentioned by one of my colleagues here, and definitely a very important point is to have a qualifier process in place. So if someone comes in with a case and they say, that, could you please investigate this device for me? You have to make sure that you have, you're allowed by law to do that, and that there's no gray areas there. So for instance, if there's a couple and a wife brings their husband's phone and say, I'll pay you a vast amount of money to investigate this phone. Legally, you wouldn't be allowed to do that unless you have, they have been informed that that the investigation will be conducted. So you need to have a strong qualifier process in place. Understanding laws, policies, definitely, as we discussed before. And then technology. So understanding what's recorded as evidence. So it's really important that we know what's in place if we're going to investigate. So just to give you an example, we've had quite a few cases recently of Office 365 accounts being hacked and data being breached. And few of our clients did not have their a set of logs enabled, which would be crucial in answering questions such as if an email was deleted or copied or modified, configuration was modified. So in Office 365, you have a basic level of logging for basic access logs and plus some level of mailbox auditing. But you don't, unless you enable the detailed mailbox auditing, you won't be able to get full information about who accessed an email, when, and what was deleted, what was copied, etc. So you need to make sure that you know what's recorded, where it's recorded, and whether those logs are enabled in advance. Functionality and reliability of tools. So because digital evidence can go to court, we need to make sure that we're using reliable tools that have been tested before, and we know what the outcomes will be or what changes might be caused to the evidence if we're using those tools. So just a few forensic tips here. So I have these tips for all the phases of the investigation. I'm not going to go through all of them because we don't have the time, but you can get the slides. I'll go through a few crucial ones. So before you start performing the investigation, make sure that you have a forensics agreement in place. So this will essentially be a document that will outline what the agreement is between yourself and the customer. And if it is within your own organization, then there should be some sort of terms of reference in place or an agreement in place as well. Prepare forms for digital evidence collection, chain of custody, and consent forms. So these are really important before starting an investigation, and make sure you have these in place. If there are any hard deadlines, legal or regulatory, make sure you know those deadlines. Prepare your forensic workstation frameworks, etc. So just to share an example here of liability. So if you have if you're setting up your forensic lab and you're doing investigations for customers, you might have in your agreement that the firm gives no assurance to the outcome of forensic services or as a result of any investigation otherwise. In no event will the firm be liable by the client under this agreement. Now, it's unfortunate that what I've highlighted is actually hidden there, as I can see it. But basically what that highlighted region said was that, let's say you're a forensic investigator and you're investigating a smartphone for a customer and you accidentally wipe the evidence. And that evidence, if you would have found, would actually have won $1 million to the customer in lawsuit. So now that you have wiped that evidence because your incompetency or maybe not having careful procedures, should the forensic firm be liable for $1 million, whatever loss there is to the client? So you have to be very careful. What you can do and what you cannot do. You should be very clear on that beforehand. So the next bit here is forensics in the cloud. So again, you have to be prepared and have forensic readiness of challenges that you might face in different environments. So for instance, the cloud. On traditional on-premise environments, typically, for example, you would have workstations, you would have logs, and so these logs might be aggregated in a central place. In the cloud, because you're running, for example, you're running VMs, once those VMs are deleted, let's say, there's no backup, no snapshot, or maybe remote logs, it's very difficult to get any evidence in that case. And so we did have someone give an example of this as well, that one of their customers, they had to conduct an investigation in the cloud, and because they did not have those logs available, it proved to be much more difficult to do that investigation. So there are some cloud-specific challenges that you should be aware of if you're operating in those environments. So the next one is collection tips. So what to do when you're collecting evidence. So when you're collecting the devices to investigate. Now I see there I only have a few minutes left, so let me see if I can go through some of these. So triage is inevitable in some cases because of the huge amount of information we have. Make sure to contain the evidence item. Do not switch it off because it'll result in loss of volatile data. So make sure to either switch it on flight mode or disconnect from the network, whatever way you can. Contain it. Record everything, screenshot, screen recording, photographs, etc. Acquisition tips. So make sure that you collect all the passwords, decryption keys beforehand via secure means if they are available. Just from a GDPR point of view, if you're handling sensitive information or you're backing up or retaining that information, make sure that you're compliant with the regulation in doing so. Make multiple copies of the evidence required, and also make sure that you can actually read the contents of the images that you're acquiring. Sometimes it happens so that you acquire the image, you return the evidence item, but then you find out that you can't actually read what was on that image. So make sure that you can read it before you return the evidence item back. Analysis. So when you're conducting the analysis, beware of evidence modification. So you need to know what might have changed when you were acquiring or collecting the evidence. And collaboration, again, is key. Report only facts, redact any sensitive personal information. So this happened with one of our clients. They had a data breach. They had to report to the DPC. And when we gave them the report, they requested that we redact any personal information. so that we're not creating another data breach on top of a previous one that already happened. So make sure that you do redact sensitive personal information if you are providing a report to third parties. There are loads of tools out there. Again, sorry for the overlap of that. Loads of tools out there: Access Data, EnCase, Xbase Forensics, ProDiscover. They are some of the multi-purpose tools that are quite recognized out there in the market. And you can also leverage the cloud in order to perform investigations on scale. But again, beware of the jurisdictional issues and also GDPR aspect. Permissibility in court. So a lot of times people have the question of what tools are permissible in court. So there's no list, at least not that I'm aware of, a defined standard list that says these tools are permissible in court. So basically you need to answer all these questions when you're doing an investigation to make sure that if you have to give a testimony in court, that you can reply to these and you have a response ready. So was the evidence gathered verified in a sound manner? Was a chain of custody maintained? Is the ownership licensing appropriate for the tool? Was proper examination environment being maintained? Can the results be duplicated? Does the analyst understand what the tools are actually doing? Do other professionals use the same tools? And is the analyst technically capable of defending or supporting their interpretation? So as a forensic analyst, you need to make sure you cover these aspects when you're actually selecting tools that you perform investigation with. So just to conclude, on the tools, you have vendors that sell digital forensic software will typically use statements such as our tool has been proven in court as a marketing technique. But really what they're saying is that the result of the tool, as well as the underlying methodology and testimony examiner, were admitted. So it's not just about the tool, it's also what processes, techniques, methodology you use, and how you give the testimony in court. So that's it from my end. Thanks, Dan. Over to you.
Neha, brilliant. Really, really great presentation. I think, yeah, Ed covered absolutely everything, didn't you, really? And looking forward to hearing from Keith in just a second on that, to follow on from that. But yeah, so much to take in, which we'll be coming back to later on. But big thanks today for BRG Consulting for kicking things off today. So let's move the slides on, and we're going to launch the second poll vote. So I'm going to stop the first one, which we'll come back to a bit later on. I'm going to ask you about big data. Actually, we thought of this while I was talking to Keith the other day, and we were chatting about big data, and we said, is big data making forensic investigations harder? Is the disbursement of data proving it more harder to actually pin down where an incident took place, something like that? So quite simple options, yes, no, or don't know. So do let us know which one you select, and which one approach to you, I should say. So, and we're going to leave that running through the duration of our next speaker, who is Keith Lockhart. Keith is Vice President of Strategic Programs at Access Data. So, Keith, I will hand over to you.
That's great. And so, Neha, wow, I wish you could keep talking for the next 5 hours. I took several notes from things you said. And I wish I could say I paid you to say some of those things, because they fall right into the next conversation. Dan, just a quick question on how we are going to answer questions from the audience. Can we do any of that during the live conversation? You want to do that after the fact?
Yeah, happy to take any questions. We've had a few questions in already, and we can take as many as you want. There is quite a few questions that have come in, so thanks to all of you for taking that. But yeah, Keith, you kick off, and we can, at any point you want to pick any of those questions out, just give me a nudge, or just feel free to take it yourself.
Okay, I asked that question only because I'm watching them come in and taking notes during Neha's conversation, so that seemed worthwhile. However, my introduction aside, I can just add to that to say that I came to Access Data in 2003. So from a technical employment perspective, I had to step back a couple of years ago and go, wow, am I still at the same place doing the same thing? And the answer to the same thing question was largely the same, but when I had to look at the adaptation that's occurred over time, it was astonishing. So I take this picture, or diagram, whatever you want to call this, and literally travel the world and talk about what I consider the root of all evil, and that was Dan's last poll question of big data. So if you've ever heard me speak or you get into the forensic space doing this type of work, you will probably inevitably suffer this problem in some shape or fashion just because there's so much stuff out there. You can define big data a lot of different ways, but what it boils down to now is, we're not turning off the internet, sadly, and there are 1,000 billion trillion different phone devices and computers and operating systems and artifacts and DVDs and CDs and USB sticks and just you name it. It's super difficult to find any type of crime or investigation or HR matter, anything that doesn't include some type of digital data today. So I'm a little biased because I work at Access Data and I'm really familiar with that solution. So I'm going to talk about that, but more generically in terms of the concepts that the solution can provide if you get into this work. And the first part of that, I think, is literally figuring out, okay, I'm in this work and I'm not in an e-discovery model, or I'm not in a targeted collection of data model. I'm in a forensic model. And generally, forensics requires using and processing all of the data, because normally, a lot of times the forensic investigation requires the disclosure of the exculpatory information as well, where, instead of just finding the things that's going to get somebody in trouble or make them guilty or something, you, as Neha said, you need to present the facts of all sides of the investigation. So, Neha had ACE in her credentials. Rock on, good job, Neha. And she said a very important word more than once. We need to be collaborative. And my version of collaborative includes hardware and people. It's kind of a force multiplier in the way we can get things done as data starts getting bigger. I have like a threefold conversation that all three folds include the computer forensic spin, but they all roll back to the fact that the big data problem is going to be underlying for those. And when I say big data, I mean, somebody told me yesterday that a new phone's coming out with a terabyte of storage in it. A phone. That just makes me want to jump off a roof half the time when you figure out, wow, how am I going to process all of that? How am I going to normalize all of that just from the fact that I have different data types, different data sources, different evidence types, depending on the device or the person that gave you the things that need to be analyzed. It's just incredible the exponential choice of things that can be put in front of you that you have to process, normalize, and analyze. I mean, back in 2003, you could still take, a disk editor, like at a disk level, and page through every sector of a floppy disk. I mean, life was great. That led to the evolution of, as Neha said, an EnCase or an FTK or the button pushing cowboy tools, because people could no longer do that sector by sector analysis. And that began the crazy adaptation of, wow, I certainly need automated technology if I'm going to do this type of work, because things are getting so big. And then I need to be able to work with other people, was what it will boil down to at some point. I built training at Access Data for the whole time I've been here. And when you take the FTK standalone investigative model, it's the same thing. It's a toolbox, you guys. If you get into this work, there is no one tool that will do everything. It would be a disservice to everybody to force that idea down anybody's throat. But when you take the standalone investigator concept, no matter what tool you're using out there, and set somebody down and watch them just accumulate all that data. I mean, it doesn't matter what tool you're using. You don't want to be the button pushing cowboy. You want to know what's happening when you're pushing those automated buttons as your technology adapts. So you need the education, you need the certification and credentialing behind it, and you need the toolbox to always be adapting. But I take that model, that standalone model, from whatever tool you're using and start replicating it to make it more collaborative, as Neha alluded to. So the first problem, and it's all about this picture, because it's a 5-minute conversation if it needs to be, or maybe a 5-year conversation. But if you take any one of the computers above or on the top side of that brick wall, that could be a standalone investigator, no matter what tool they're using. And if you look at the top, kind of the top left, maybe the 11 o'clock position, where it says centralized processing farm, where those 4 computers are sitting together. If you roll back in history a little bit and you think of the Core i3, 5, 7, when Intel changed the world with the CPU core models, that was about the time we were coming up with this, wow, we need to be able to distribute processing because data is too big. Instead of using one machine, let's use a lot of machines. Access Data started in the decryption field, and the mantra used to be, don't waste a cycle, guess passwords or guess ideas to crack an encryption scheme. That still applies, but now it's don't waste the cycle, spin up a bunch of machines so you have massive processing power at your disposal. And I don't want to forget it, because that's one of the questions that kind of came into the question window about budgets and spend and things like that. Neha mentioned the cloud as far as some of the challenges faced from an investigative standpoint. I'm going to mention it as a solution to some of the hardware problem. So if we build a timeline of what I'm saying, you'll get into this world as a standalone, you and a machine. And very quickly you'll realize, wow, there's so much data, I should hire some more people to work with me. And then maybe because you've seen a conversation like this, you'll say, there's so much data, it takes me forever to process it. I need more horsepower. So I'll put it right here so I don't forget it. In the cloud world, you should be able to spin up more horsepower to process the 4 terabytes of junk that just landed on your desk, and then spin those back down when you're not using them. And that seems like a simple concept of turn off, turn on, turn off. But the model that most people sit in today, as the cloud becomes more prolific in the solution, is let's go out and buy a bunch of machines so we have all that horsepower. And as soon as you set them up and they're sitting on a shelf working, they're depreciating in value. That's the next greatest thing is out tomorrow, and you're left with a bunch of hardware spend that you wish you didn't spend. So keep that in mind. The folks that are asking those types of questions, find a solution that allows you to scale with agility, not just buy a bunch of things and then wait your 2-year or 3-year cycle to upgrade them. Be able to turn those things off and on just because of the need when you run into this. So sorry, that's a tangent, but I want to make sure I get it out there. The normalization, when I talk about the 3 folds that I'm going to try to address, the normalization factor is what I was mentioning with, say, a bunch of different phones, or a bunch of different applications, or the artifacts, or the operating systems, or the devices. In the picture, in the middle of all those blue computers on the top side of the brick wall, there's a big computer that says centralized database. So in the Access Data world, we kind of really subscribe to that model where it doesn't matter what set of tools, at least from the Access Data perspective, you're using. Mobile stuff, legal review, electronic discovery, incident response, forensic, when we ingest data in a forensic capacity or any capacity, we put it into a central location in a normalized format where all of the tools can be leveraged against it. So the flexibility conversation of, I'm looking at it with FTK, I'm digging through something from an enterprise perspective because we had a breach, and in the end of that breach, we still got to find out what happened, as you guys have heard. So I need to do the dead box analysis or the artifact analysis. Many of the scenarios you can bring up will be okay and a lot more flexible for you if you get the data in a spot where not just you can get to it, but anybody else collaborating with you can get to it. So we want to normalize it, and we want to make it available to anybody in your environment with whatever type of tools you want to use for that. The second part I would say, is the timely processing. And that goes back to that conversation about the distributed processing farm up there, where you need more machines to process that data because it's so big. One of the most common scenarios is this, and it still exists all over the place. And I can go out and start this conversation, and inevitably the hand goes up to, yep, that's our life. We can't stand it. What do we do? And let's pretend I'm the technical investigator, because 10 years ago I could turn the printer on when somebody had a problem, and now I'm running a forensic lab. Folks that are doing investigations or analytics or whatever they're doing, they bring all the data, they dump it on my desk, and they literally have in their mind, hey, Keith, we need you to hit the easy button, provide us all the evidence or all the data that's going to make our case or our investigation for us, and call us when you're done. And they run off. And, that happens for a while. And then they stop talking to me because, A, I can never get their data processed in time for them to do anything with it. And B, every time they call me, I push them off and don't help them. However, if I have the ability to say, okay, great, dump all your stuff on here. Hold on a minute. Give me at least a list of things to search for, because I'm doing a lot of technical work, and frankly, I shouldn't be necessarily investigating all of your data for you when you know all about your investigation. Excuse me, Neha brought up this scenario about, the legality and the law, and knowing the things that will make or break investigations or cases, or knowing the elements of a crime. When you have technical folks that are doing technical work, it's usually very lopsided. A lot of non-technical investigative personnel are dumping a lot of data on the very small in number technical folks that have learned how to use all the voodoo technologies, NCASE and FTK and everything, and they end up doing everything. That causes this massive backlog. So if we can get that timely processing done, that starts a huge wave that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger of success, because stuff just builds up on the shelf. Trials would come and go, hearings would come and go, and the data that people needed to make those trials successful never even got to be used. So that's that second part, is getting things processed in a timely fashion. And then the third part is putting the right work in the right hands. And that is the literal force multiplier of taking the forensic person who's trying to do, technical, crazy things like, wow, this isn't the easy button. There's not a lot of stuff laying all over, not a lot of user-created data laying all over the desktop, so to speak. I need to go carve things out of hex at the drive level. They deleted everything. They formatted the box. That doesn't mean we can't get anything. Give it to me. Let me put some of my technical skills to use and get some artifacts out that we can make or break what we have to do. That's usually that's a 10-hour day every day if people are doing that and having to get super technical. So rather than being responsible for all the analysis, let's use the bottom half of the picture in that red box on the other side of the brick wall, which is to say, give the forensic folks an outlet to have the investigators review their own data. That's a multifaceted conversation. I'll pick on Dan. Let's pretend Dan is the investigator who's, he knows I've got this FTK thing and a bunch of other tools in the toolbox, and he laughs at me a lot for it. But he's the one who's always vexing my day because he's the one bringing all that technical stuff there. Woe be the day when I stop Dan. I'm like, get back here. Dan, Dan, I want you to look through your own data. And he cowers and says, no way, I'm not doing that. I know what you do. I don't want no part of it. And I said, Dan, when's the last time you were on the internet? And he has to kind of sheepishly admit, like 5 minutes before he came to talk to me, he was doing something on the internet. And I said, that's fantastic. I'm going to give you, Dan, a way, looks like a browser essentially, to sit down and go through your own data. And he's like, ugh. And I say, look, you don't have to call and chase me down anymore. Do it yourself. And he thinks, okay. And literally, I can get it back to you in a time where you can actually use it. You can buy me lunch again. We can start talking again, because I give Dan the opportunity, and I spend a couple hours with him to say, here's how you use this. Here's how you can bookmark your findings or label things that are important to you. I'll help you generate a work product, a deliverable report. But let's get you looking through this so you're not waiting on me all the time. And the relationship just starts changing back to normal. Things get done. Data can be used. Dan's happy. I'm happy. And the environment gets happier. Now, that's literally on the timeline, starting with, oh, wow, I'm getting into forensics. I found myself a tool. I got some education, actually certified in it. And now I know how to have a repeatable process where I can collect data in a good manner of integrity, follow my chain of custody. I can go through it. I can get a report done and give it to somebody who cares. To the other end of the spectrum now, where you've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, everybody knows. So, if you bill it, they'll show up with their stuff. Everybody's giving you everything they have and expecting you to do all the work. You've become the most popular resource in the building, and you need to help affect change because you're swamped with data and things to do. That's where this model comes in. So you may not get to it. You may be anywhere on the timeline where it's you and one other person, you or two other people, or you and a bunch of Dans. Either way, we want to normalize the data so everybody can use it in a fashion relative to them. We want to process it faster because we have so much data. We literally need ways to get through it or get it ingested faster. And then we want to put the work back in the right hands. I used to just say, look, more machines, better to process. More people, better to analyze. But the reality is it's not just as simple as throwing more people at the problem. It's throwing the right people at the problem, having the right people doing that right work like that. So knowing that, I want to, just as the conversation rolls in a little bit, because you may, once you start doing forensics, those other things may happen. If we get into the incident response world, as we mentioned, I said it a minute ago, Neha said it, the dead box analytics of what happened so you can remediate the problem, fix it, and prevent it from happening again, this will still apply. Legal review conversation. Maybe gosh forbid, an oil rig blows up in the Gulf of Mexico, and for the next 6 years, you have hundreds of thousands and billions and millions of documents and email to pour through, and you need 600 people all of a sudden to be able to access a data set somewhere. that really ties into that collaboration concept. And not just collaboration like, let's work, Monday through Friday, upload all of our collective results on Friday so we start fresh on Monday. I want an environment where if I'm doing technical work and Dan's doing analytic work and needs help or finds something important, I see it in real time. I mean, that's way far into the timeline spectrum that we're progressing to. We've got all the hardware we need, all the people we need, all the review capability we need. Now let's get that review and that forensic work multiplied in real time across everybody. So that's largely what this picture does, is illustrate on the left, on one side of the timeline, the standalone world, and taking it all the way to the far end of the timeline where you're collaborating in real time with a lot of horsepower and a lot of people. So that said, I want to address a couple of the questions that came in. And then, Neha, because you're on here and you're a practitioner, I want to drag you back into this conversation for a minute and ask you how you're addressing your big data problem. And I'm putting that out now so you can think about it before I get back to you, but I would love to hear your real-time or your real-world conversation about that. So a couple of questions. The last one I can see, is there a process for tool certification? I happen to have been incredibly involved in the Access Data certification over time. So there are processes largely relative to the things you're doing. I'm also a member of IASIS, an organization that has the CFCE certification that Neha had on her slide, which is a year-long process where you go through several different hardware and kit and things you have to process and continue on an investigation. So it really depends relative to the tool you have and the outcome you're after, how you certify. But I would say, and it really depends on your, what do you call it, jurisdiction maybe, or your environment, if certification is viewed as valuable. If it is, certainly go find that. If not, well, whatever you need to credential yourself, go get what you're after. The question about what are your tips from getting buy-in from a board, and this is about spend, and it kind of ties into another question that says, are budgets too often too thin to allow for this effectively? And I would say budgets are always the problem, the investigative side of the house. If you go out to talk to the criminal element, they don't care. They're doing whatever they want, and budget's not an issue. Having that hardware, having that training, buying that software, simply buying hard drive space to store copies of evidence while you work on copies of evidence, and keep evidence sitting around in case something gets appealed or you have to reopen an investigation. The costs get crazy, which is why, again, I want to keep that cloud point in everybody's head, because not only can you spin up the machines to process massive amounts of data faster, look, where are you going to store that stuff? What can scale with your needs? And if you don't have the money to operate an environment on premise where you are, look, you hear the term software as a service, desktop as a service, platform as a service. Those type of things exist where you don't have to spend the money to build a brick and mortar room or building that's secure to store evidence. It's a technology conversation, you guys. Use technology the best you can to help answer questions like that. And then the one other question I want to kind of touch on, let me scroll down here for a second. Securing and preserving that digital chain of custody seems to be a problem. So in my world, we call it fruit of the poisonous tree. And this is because in this super critical phase, especially in a forensic world, we're largely tied to criminal investigations. You have to, if you don't gather your data in that forensically sound methodology that you can repeat, that you can take to a court and show how that worked, yeah, you got problems right out of the gate. Because if somebody that knows what they're talking about, and that scenario is much more prevalent today than it was 15, 20 years ago, a lot of the people that were practitioners now sit on the other side of the conversation and say, did you do that correctly? And you better be able to prove that you did, or you get into that fruit of the poisonous tree conversation. That is super, well, it could be a massive problem if you don't know what you're doing and how to address it. And for people that are on this call, I'll just touch on one concept about that, and it's the conversation of hash values. And it's not the drug conversation, it's the math conversation. The most common way of ensuring your digital chain of custody or in the integrity of your data is running some math against the data. And the simple way to say that, because I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination, is if I take an algorithm and run it against the data I've collected, I'll get a result. If I change one bit of that data, any of it, and run the same math against it, I will get a completely different mathematical result. That is by far the most common way to supply data integrity information to anybody in the forensic industry that asks. You know, when you're starting out of the gate, did you collect it appropriately? Have you changed it? You know, in the old days, oh wow, let's go seize this computer and you know, get somebody in trouble with it. And then once they have the computer, they sit in the evidence room and get online and play games on it. No, I didn't do anything to it. Right. That's always a problem to face, but it starts right at the beginning. Super serious problem. Easily addressable, just to make sure you know what you're doing and can replicate and defend your process. Defensibility in your process, because it's repeatable, is a super great concept starting right at the beginning. Okay, gosh, that was me running my mouth a lot to talk about one side of the spectrum if you get started in this, all the way to the other side where you can collaborate in real time with on-premise stuff or stuff in the cloud, and ways to get people working together, getting the right people doing the right work so you don't get bogged down in that big data, you know, case overload or big data overload where you're just so backlogged you're not effective in any part of the timeline. So this picture, that'll be available from this, and if you ever have any questions or want to talk about any of the concepts from that, I'm sure Dan will find a way to make that that communication available, or whatever contact information you need from us, because I would love to help you if you get in this spot. Again, a little biased because of where I work, but I know a lot of problems in this area from years and years and years of talking to the people out in the world that are doing this. So there you go, Dan. That's how I want to roll. I would like to get back to Neha if she has a minute to tell me how she's addressing this big data problem in her world, if that's possible. If we have a minute, but you tell me.
No problem at all. We have just got to run one more poll. So yeah, big thanks to Keith Lockhart from Access Data. We do need just to run the third poll question, which we're going to do. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so let's just run this for the duration. And this one was about GDPR. Has the introduction of GDPR caused you to consider doing more forensic investigations? Yes, more. No, fewer. No, difference. No difference. Other. I can tell I read these. I write these myself. So yes, yes, no difference, or other. So do vote on that. Let's actually move on to the poll questions, because the second poll question we actually asked was about big data. And we asked, is big data making forensic investigations harder? 53% said yes, only 8% no, 37% don't know. So yeah, Neha, let's maybe get your thoughts on that. As Keith said, 53% said yes, it is making it harder. I'll tell you what I thought of, just as you started your presentation. Other thing I was thinking about making forensic investigations harder, I was talking to a company yesterday about this, is encrypted data. And you know, I'm sure our audience listening to this don't need it re-explaining the various government attitudes towards you know, secure communications. But let's do big data first, Neha. Is that making forensic investigations harder, as our poll suggests?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Keith, for all the kind words. And I love the term voodoo technologies, and definitely agree throwing the right people into
I'm biased. I'm sorry, I'm biased.
Yeah, throwing the right people into the right problem definitely is the way to do it. To answer your question about the big data, so for ourselves, you know, the obvious solution would be faster technology, faster computational power, in order to address the big data problem. Now, from our point of view, we get a few. So we specialize in information security. Sorry, we provide information security consulting, but we do a lot of other jobs. So ours is not a sole forensics firm. So we get a few cases in a year. So based on the number of cases we get, we need to make a decision on how much we want to invest in the area. So lately, the sort of cases we've got is really, you know, Office 365 accounts being compromised and analyzing logs and so on. Now, in order to address the big data problem for us, and you know, again, taking into consideration the cases we get, we focus on triage. So basically, if we do have a lot of data, we would, you know, try and narrow down as to where we need to acquire the data from. And at the moment, we have our internal infrastructure in order to do the forensics. So, you know, no connection to the internet, totally isolated environment, and so on. And so we're not using the capability or leveraging the capability of the cloud yet. And again, this will definitely change in the future as the number of cases that we might get would grow. So for our purpose, and you said there rightly that it's quite scary when you see that phones will have terabytes of storage space, and then how do you do forensics then? So triage to me would be the answer, and definitely faster processing power and computational power would be the way to go.
Thanks for that. I really appreciate the real-world perspective from the field.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, let's just go back to the very first poll, actually, because we asked, are you currently running forensic investigations? 42% said yes internally. Obviously, we don't have the scope here of actually what kind of size of businesses. It's just pure numbers from the audience. 42% internally, only 9% using external specialists, 29% not yet, 18% no. Keith, maybe let's just ask you on that only 9% using external specialists. I mean, I suppose the first question is, obviously someone like Nehar is obviously available. I'm sure BH Consulting would be very happy to talk to you about your needs, as are Access Data, of course. But I would have thought that'd be higher. I don't know how many people do this internally, because all I've heard today suggests to me this is obviously something that you're going to require quite a lot of knowledge and capability to do.
Yeah, largely, it's difficult for people to let chain of custody stuff out of their chain of custody. So bringing people in from the outside to work on things like that, generally problematic. The cloud is a big issue for that. I would say the best adaptation going on right now are places in the cloud are generating, chain of custody compliant sections where people that have that problem can go comfortably and put stuff up there and know it's not going to leak all over the planet. That is a huge constrictor to outside resources in the forensic space anyway, especially the forensic space that revolves around criminal investigation. So that makes sense to me just because of those issues, and people can't normally get around those unless they take some really specified actions.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. We're going to just started to run over, so we are going to stop this vote on GDPR. And I asked, has the introduction of GDPR caused you to consider doing more forensic investigations? I guess to kind of know where. Finding out where things are. Quite a split there. 61% said no difference, 32% said more, 4% other, 2% no, fewer. I guess no one was ever going to say they're going to do fewer investigations. Nehar, let's maybe just finish up with you and then we'll get some words from Keith. More people are doing, 32% said more are doing GDPR. Has GDPR had a big impact upon forensic investigations and the way it's done and the amount that needs to be done?
Yes, so from our perspective and the cases that we've got recently, I would definitely say that yes. Because there is a mandate to inform the supervisory authority if there has been a data breach, and the investigation itself, you have to be quite thorough. The report has to be quite thorough because it will be going to that supervisory authority, So you need to make sure that you have covered your tracks, you have all the details in there. Now, sometimes when you're doing these investigations, it depends on what the company requires. But when you're sending it out to a regulatory body, you do need to provide all the details, and therefore your investigation report has to be quite comprehensive. And again, like I mentioned before, when you are providing these reports, you need to make sure that you redact any information that further does not cause a data breach. So definitely there is more. You have to be more careful, and your reports have to be more comprehensive. The investigation process should still remain the same, like your chain of custody should still be maintained, integrity, and so on. So the forensic investigation process still remains the same, but yes, the requirement, because of GDPR, I believe, previously, it might be the case if there was a breach, organizations might, wipe a device and just move on. But now, because of that obligation, they definitely are going for, definitely require these investigations more and more.
Right. Okay. And maybe Keith, let's just come to you for sort of the last word, just as we finish up here. In terms of forensic investigations, all we've learned from Nehar and yourself today, it seems that this is obviously a still quite skilled area that you're going to need quite a lot of capability in. Do you see kind of a bright future for forensic investigations when considering, even though GDPR survey they didn't really suggest much, but the big data thing is suggesting quite a lot. Do you see that, people are still going to need to be able to skill up on this in the future?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're not turning the internet off, much to my chagrin. And you see some of the illustrations out there that will say, there's all this big data, all this stuff floating around, and we've created most of it in the last 2 to 3 years. Of all the data that's out there in the world, we just find more ways to make more even recently. And, like I said, it's hard to find any type of problem right now that doesn't have a device in it or some type of digital data. So the ability to get through that digital data, whether it's a targeted collection in one environment or a complete deep dive forensic analysis on another, especially the disclosure issue of, oh, wow, there are 30 million text messages. How am I possibly going to get through that? As the future continues to hit us, machine learning, artificial intelligence of, let logarithmic algorithms and things go through and help you. As the investigator, you and your technology really got a mind meld. Help the technology and the investigator become a better investigative team is the mantra there. So the future's certainly not going away. Bright is probably a relative definition because there's so much to keep. That adaptability is so intense with all this just because of all the different things that keep coming out. But yeah, it's not going away. They're just going to require the education and the tools to keep up with it, and that's the whole keep on learning and keep yourself fresh when it comes to all the new things coming out so you're staying on top of your job.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. It's good to be on top. And hopefully we've given you some learning points today from this webinar because unfortunately we are going to bring things to an end. So big thanks for all of you for joining us today. And of course our speakers, Nehar, Keith, and obviously our sponsor today, Access Data. Just a date for the diary. Our next online summit is in almost literally a month, the 26th and 27th of March. Registration is open for that now. We're not touching on forensics so much, but there is a session on incident response, which we might kind of cover again, but hopefully there's enough learning from this today for you. If you're interested in upcoming InfoSecurity webinars, do visit the website www.infosecurity-magazine.com, where there's a whole plethora of webinars from the past. And the next one coming up is actually on the 14th of March, so 2 weeks today. That's on information theft attacks, the cyber criminals' latest focus. So do join us for that one on the 14th of March, same time, 3 p.m. GMT. There will be a recording available of this webinar very soon, and I'll include the slide decks that some of you have asked for today on that on-demand version, so do check that one out. Of course, you can listen to the webinar all over again. And just as you leave, do please rate the webinar, let us know what you thought. Obviously, give us a star rating, which would be very appreciated. So with that, big thanks to all of you for joining, to Access Data for their sponsorship, to Nehar and Keith, and we'll see you